My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 32 years old, an elementary school teacher in Boston. If I had to choose the moment I finally understood that I could no longer keep begging my family for love, I would choose the night 3 weeks ago inside the ballroom of the Hartwell Hotel, where 150 people raised their glasses to celebrate my father's retirement. My father was Victor Whitmore, a man who had spent 40 years building Whitmore Development. To him, a person's worth had always been measured by money and power. My mother Evelyn believed that even more deeply than he did. My younger sister Lauren sat at the front table smiling, as if the entire room had been created just to admire her. And I was seated at table 14 near the kitchen doors. Beside me was Ethan Cole, my husband. He wore a simple, dark blue suit, no expensive watch, nothing that would make my family look at him for more than 2 seconds. And maybe that was exactly why they had never truly seen him. My mother took the microphone after my father's long speech. She looked around the room and then her eyes stopped on me. That look always came before a sentence I would have to swallow like pain. Lauren has made us so proud, she said, her voice so sweet, it felt cold. She is carrying on her father's legacy. Clara chose a different path. She teaches children, 3rd grade or 2nd grade, I can never remember. A few soft laughs rose around the room. I kept my hands under the table so no one would see my fingers trembling. Then my mother leaned closer to the microphone. But at least Clara found herself a husband, she said. Though honestly, even now, we still have no idea what he actually does for a living. The entire room laughed. Some people lowered their heads. Some covered their mouths. Some looked at us with pity. But the laughter was loud enough to cut straight through my chest. It was not only aimed at Ethan. It was aimed at the 4 years I had spent trying to protect him from my family's contempt. If you have ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to love you, comment 1. I want to know how many people out there understand what it feels like to smile while something inside you breaks. I turned to Ethan. I thought he would take my hand like he always did and whisper that everything would pass. But this time the chair beside me slowly slid backward. The sound of its legs scraping across the marble floor was clearer than the laughter. Ethan stood up. Rebecca Hayes, my father's biggest business partner, suddenly stared at him. My mother was still laughing on the stage. My father was laughing too, the kind of laugh that belonged to a man who believed the whole world was still in his hands. But Ethan was not laughing. He adjusted his cuff, stepped away from table 14, and walked straight toward the stage. I wanted to call him back, but somewhere deep inside me a small part whispered that maybe tonight needed to break. Because before Ethan walked up there, I had spent 32 years living like someone who was always apologizing for not being bright enough. And I had no idea that just a few minutes later the man my family mocked as someone who had no real job would make my father lose the thing he loved most. Not money. The right to look down on other people. 6 years before that night, I met Ethan in a small coffee shop near the elementary school where I taught. It was a cold October day. I had just finished 12 parent-teacher meetings in a row, my throat dry, my head filled with children who read too slowly, and parents who were too busy to realize their children needed more hugs than higher scores. The coffee shop was almost full. There was only one empty seat, left across from a man typing on his laptop with his head lowered. He was wearing a gray sweater, his hair slightly messy, and beside him was a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. I stood there for a few seconds, then asked quietly, "Would you mind if I sat here?" He looked up. The first thing I remember was not his face, but the way he looked at me. He did not rush to judge me. He did not glance at my clothes or my bag. It was simply a warm, calm look, as if I did not have to prove anything at all. "Not at all," he said. "Please." We barely spoke that first day. He worked. I graded papers. When I got up to leave, he only asked, "Will you be here at this time tomorrow?" I did not know why I answered honestly. Maybe. The next day I came back, He was there too. Then the day after that, for almost 2 months, we shared the same table at the back of that coffee shop like a habit neither of us had named. He said he worked in education. I said I taught third grade. He did not ask who my father was. He did not ask what neighborhood I lived in. He did not ask why someone with the Whitmore name would choose to teach elementary school for a salary that was nothing worth bragging about. It was the absence of those questions that made me feel safe. At home, every conversation had a price. A question about work always led to salary. A compliment always came with comparison. But with Ethan, when I told him about Emma, an 8-year-old girl who took nearly 10 minutes to read one paragraph but still refused to give up, he listened as if it was the most important story of the day. He asked what books Emma liked. He asked whether I was tired. He asked who took care of me after I spent all day taking care of everyone else. I fell in love with him through small things like that. Our first date did not involve a fancy restaurant. Ethan cooked spaghetti in his small apartment in Cambridge. The windows rattled softly in the wind. The kitchen was a little cramped and tomato sauce splashed onto his sleeve, but I remember laughing for a long time. In that place, no one asked why I was not more ambitious. No one said Lauren was doing better than I was. No one made me feel as if love also needed a report card attached to it. 2 years later, Ethan proposed to me by the Charles River. The ring was not very large, but his hand trembled when he opened the box. I said yes before he even finished asking. In that moment between the cold wind and the lights of the city, I knew I had chosen a life my family would never understand. What I did not know was that Ethan was also choosing silence. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he wanted to see how my family would treat him if they believed he had nothing worth using. I was born in a large house in Beacon Hill, where every framed photo was placed in the perfect position, and every smile had to be beautiful enough for guests to believe we were a perfect family. My father was rarely present at dinner, but his name was always there. Whitmore Development appeared in newspapers on fundraising invitations and on the lips of neighbors, whenever they told my mother how lucky she was. My mother always smiled when she heard that. She liked being called lucky. She liked the feeling of standing beside a man the entire city had to respect. From a very young age, I understood that in our house, success was not a choice. It was a duty. And if you were not successful in the way my father defined it, you became a scratch on the portrait he had spent his whole life polishing. Lauren learned that faster than I did. My younger sister was 4 years younger than me, but even as a child she knew how to enter a room as if the lights belonged to her. She loved parties, loved new dresses, loved standing beside my father while he shook hands with guests. She remembered the names of his business partners, knew when to laugh, and knew how to say things that made adults laugh, and call her a little girl with leadership potential. I was different. I liked sitting in the library. I liked reading books to the neighborhood children. I liked watching a frightened child slowly relax when someone was patient enough with them. When I was 10, I told my father I wanted to become a teacher one day. He was reading the newspaper. He only looked up for 1 second before saying, "You're still young. You'll think differently when you grow up." But I never did. By the time I went to college, my father wanted me to study business. My mother said in a gentle voice with a blade hidden inside it that an education degree would waste the Whitmore name. Lauren was only in high school then, but she cut in with a soft laugh and said, "Clara probably likes blackboards more than boardrooms." The whole family laughed. I laughed with them because back then I still thought that if I did not react, the pain would become smaller. I chose education. The day I received my acceptance letter, my father glanced at it and placed it back on the table like an unimportant bill. He said, "At least you can still marry well." That sentence followed me for years. It made me understand that in my father's eyes, if I could not become the person he wanted, I still had one backup value left. I could marry a man wealthy enough not to embarrass him. Lauren followed the exact road he had drawn for her. A prestigious university, an internship at his company, then a position prepared for her before she even graduated. Every step Lauren took was celebrated like a family victory. But on the day I received my first classroom assignment, my mother only sent one message. I hope you know what you're doing. I did know. I knew more clearly than ever. But knowing you have chosen the right path does not mean it stops hurting when the people who should be proud of you treat that choice like a failure. And that was only the beginning. Because in the Whitmore family, contempt rarely came like a slap. It came through small, soft, polite sentences, wrapped in the velvet of family love, so that when you started bleeding, they could still say you were just too sensitive. After marrying Ethan, I once hoped things would soften. I thought that when my parents saw I was happy, they would stop treating my life like a failed plan. I was wrong. In the Whitmore family, happiness had no real value unless it came with a number impressive enough to make other people gasp. At our first dinner after the honeymoon, my mother asked Ethan what he did. He said he worked in education. My mother placed her knife down on the plate very softly, but the look in her eyes changed completely. Like Clara, she asked. Ethan answered that his work involved helping children learn better. My father only nodded, the kind of nod he gave to something not worth remembering. Lauren sat across from us, slowly turning her wineglass in her hand. At least you two share the same passion, she said. One of you teaches children, and the other probably sells software to schools. The sentence was not loud, but it was loud enough for the whole table to hear. I looked at Ethan and saw that he was still calm. So I did what I had become best at doing in that house. I stayed silent. After that, every holiday felt like the same play being performed again and again. On Thanksgiving, my mother told Lauren to talk about the $2 million Henderson contract. My father listened carefully, adding a few details, so the guests would understand that his youngest daughter was becoming a worthy successor. When it was my turn, I said that a student named Noah had finally read an entire book after months of crying in front of every page. My mother replied, "How sweet," then turned to Lauren and asked where she had bought her new handbag. One time, my school held a spring play. The children made their own props out of cardboard and practiced their lines until their voices were hoarse. I called my father 2 weeks in advance. Dad, can you come? The kids would be so happy if someone from my family was there. He said, I have a real meeting that afternoon, Clara. Another time? A real meeting. As if 8-year-old children trembling on a stage did not belong to real life. That afternoon, Ethan came. He sat in the front row holding a small bouquet of flowers and clapped the loudest when Noah forgot his line and then remembered it by himself. After the performance, Ethan told the children they had done wonderfully. I stood by the wings and felt my throat tighten. I did not cry because my father had failed to come. I cried because Ethan had come and because I had grown used to being grateful for things that should have been ordinary. The thing that hurt me most happened at my father's birthday last year. Lauren had just been promoted. The whole family raised their glasses, and my father said Lauren had a natural instinct for business. Then Lauren leaned toward me close enough for her words to sound like a private confession. You really did marry down, Clara. But luckily not everyone needs ambition. Ethan was sitting right beside me. I felt his hand pause around his glass of water. My father heard it. My mother heard it too. But no one said anything. They simply let that sentence sit in the middle of the dinner table like a polished knife. That night when we got home, Ethan stood by the window for a long time. I apologized to him. He turned around, his eyes sadder than they were angry. Don't apologize for them, he said. But Clara, you can't keep letting them hurt you and call it family. I knew he was right. But some people have lived in a dark room for so long that when someone finally opens the door, even the light feels frightening. I was afraid of losing my family. Afraid of being called ungrateful. Afraid that if I pushed back, everything would break. And then I realized that some things had already been broken for a long time. I had simply been holding the sharp pieces in my hands and convincing myself they were love. The invitation to my father's retirement party arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was not the kind of paper invitation with gold lettering that Lauren received. It was an email from my mother's assistant. The subject line was painfully formal. An evening honoring Victor Whitmore. After 40 years of dedication to the real estate industry, I stared at the email for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it. Another part of me still wanted to believe that maybe this time my father would look at me as his daughter, not as a small footnote in the margins of his life. That afternoon, my mother called. She did not ask if I was well. She did not ask how school was going. She did not mention Ethan. She went straight to the point. "Clara, I need to talk about the seating arrangement." I opened the seating chart she had attached. Table 1 was near the stage. Table 2 was for major partners. Table 3 was for the board of directors. I kept scrolling before I finally saw my name at table 14. The far corner of the room near the kitchen doors. "Table 14, Mom," I asked even though I already knew the answer. "You know your father has many important guests," my mother said. "The Hayes family, the Colemans, a few investors from New York. I can't just seat people randomly." People. The word sounded as light as dust, but it was enough to show me my place in the family. I was not an important guest. I was someone who had to be placed far from the stage, so I would not ruin the picture. Before hanging up, my mother added, "Wear something tasteful. And if anyone asks about work, don't talk too much about the school. The people there have real careers." After the call, I sat still on the edge of the bed. Ethan walked in, looked at my face, and let out a quiet breath. "They seated us near the kitchen, didn't they?" I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. "Do you want me to go?" he asked. That question hurt more than what my mother had said. Because for 4 years, Ethan had always given me the right to choose. He had never forced me to cut ties with my family. He had never made me choose between him and them. He only stood there patiently, like someone who knew the house was on fire, but was still waiting for me to walk out on my own. "Yes," I said. "I want you to come with me." Ethan sat down beside me. He took my hand. "I stayed silent because you needed time," he said. "But if they hurt you again, Clara, I won't just sit there." I looked at him. There was no anger in his voice. It was that calmness that scared me. The next morning, my mother accidentally forwarded me an email she had sent to Lauren 3 days earlier. I opened it and felt my stomach turn cold when I saw one line. "Make sure Clara and Ethan are seated at the last table. We can't have him talking to your father's partners. Who knows what he might say about his education work." I read it again and again. Each time the words cut deeper. Not because I was surprised, but because for the first time their contempt was no longer hidden beneath politeness. The night before the party, Ethan took a white envelope from his briefcase. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. I asked what it was. He looked at me for a long time. "Insurance," he said. "For what?" "For you. In case they go too far." I did not ask anything else. Maybe because I was afraid of the answer. Deep down, I already knew that night would not only be my father's retirement party, it would be the place where something finally ended. The Hartwell Hotel stood in the heart of Boston, the kind of old hotel my father had always loved because it made everything look as if it had history, even things that had only just been bought with money. That night, the grand hall glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Servers in white jackets moved back and forth with silver trays of wine. Soft jazz floated through the air, elegant enough to cover conversations about contracts, shares, and power. Ethan walked beside me, his hand resting lightly against my back. He did not say much. I knew he was watching. My father once said that silent people at important parties were usually people who had nothing to say. But Ethan was silent in a different way, as if he was reading the entire room without needing anyone to introduce him. My mother stood near the entrance in an emerald green dress, a diamond necklace around her neck, one my father had bought after a major deal. When she saw us, she smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Clara," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "You made it." As if I had been an unlikely possibility, her eyes slid toward Ethan. "Hello, Ethan." "Hello, Mom," he said politely. She did not correct the way he addressed her, but she did not return it either. She only tilted her head toward the far end of the room. "Table 14 is over there. You two can sit down first. We'll do the family photos later if there's time." "If there's time?" I heard every word clearly. If you have ever stood in a room full of relatives and still felt like an unwanted guest comment, I understand. Sometimes being left out is not loud, but it hurts for a very long time. We walked across the ballroom. I saw Lauren near the stage wearing a fitted red dress, her hair perfectly curled, standing beside my father like an heir already stamped and approved. My father had one hand on her shoulder as he spoke with several investors. He saw me raised his glass from a distance, then turned back to the conversation he had not finished. Table 14 was exactly what I had imagined. It was so close to the kitchen doors that every time they opened, heat and the smell of butter drifted out. Servers had to tilt their trays to avoid brushing my shoulder. At the table were a few distant relatives and two couples I did not know. All of them looked at Ethan with polite but empty eyes, the kind of look given to someone whose name did not need to be remembered. Just as we sat down, a woman at the next table turned around. I recognized her immediately. Rebecca Hayes, the biggest partner my father had been pursuing for the past year. She looked at Ethan longer than normal, her gaze sharpening, then tilted her head slightly. "Excuse me," she said. "Have we met before?" Ethan smiled. "I don't think so." Rebecca did not take her eyes off him. She took out her phone and scrolled quickly. Her face changed. From curiosity to doubt, then almost to shock. I saw her finger stop on the screen. At that exact moment, the lights in the room dimmed. The band stopped playing. My father stepped onto the stage to a thick wave of applause. Rebecca had to turn back, but before she did, she looked at Ethan one more time, as if she had just discovered a hidden door right in front of her. I leaned closer to Ethan. "Does she know you?" He looked at the stage, his voice very low. "Maybe." "Ethan." He placed his hand over mine. "Not now, Clara. Not now." Those words sent a chill down my spine. Because for the first time that night, I understood that my family was the only one who believed Ethan had nothing in his hands. My father always knew how to control a room. He did not need to speak loudly. He only had to stand beneath the lights and look down at the crowd, with the eyes of a man who was used to being heard, and the ballroom would naturally fall silent. 40 years he began. 40 years of building from empty lots, from the first blueprints, from negotiations that seemed impossible to win, all the way to this night. Applause filled the room. My father smiled and accepted it as something obvious. He spoke about high-rise buildings, about contracts that had put the Whitmore name in newspapers. Then he moved on to family. "I did not get here alone," he said. "I had Evelyn, my wonderful wife, standing behind every major decision of my life." My mother sat at the front table, lifting one hand to her chest, her eyes glistening at exactly the right moment. "And I have Lauren." My father continued, his voice brightening. "My youngest daughter, the pride of Whitmore Development. 28 years old, vice president of marketing, sharp, decisive, and even more ruthless than I am when she walks into a negotiation." The room laughed loudly. Lauren stood to receive the applause. I looked at my sister, then at Ethan's hand resting still on the tablecloth. He did not clap. He only watched. A moment later, my father said, "My family also has another daughter." My heart lifted slightly. Even after being hurt so many times, there was still a foolish part of me that hoped he might say something kind. Maybe just one sentence. Clara chose her own path. Clara makes me proud in a different way. My father looked toward table 14. Everyone's gaze followed his. Clara, my eldest daughter, he said, then paused just long enough. She is still trying to understand what she wants to do with her life. A few laughs broke out. Not many, but enough. Enough to make my face burn. Enough to make me feel like that 10-year-old girl again laughed at by her whole family for saying she wanted to become a teacher. My father raised his glass. But that is what family is. We love our children even when they do not follow the path we hoped for. This time the laughter was clearer. I saw several people glance at me and smile. Ethan leaned toward me. Do you want to step outside? I did, but my legs would not move. Maybe because part of me still needed to witness how far they were willing to go. Then my mother stepped onto the stage. She took the microphone from my father and smiled softly. Victor spoke beautifully about family. I only want to add a few words as a mother. I knew that look. My mother's cruelest sentences always came in her gentlest voice. Lauren makes us proud every day, she said. As for Clara, she chose a simpler life. She teaches school. 3rd grade or 2nd grade, I still get them mixed up. A light ripple of laughter moved through the room. I lowered my eyes to the tablecloth. But at least my mother, said pausing, so the whole room could hear. Clearly Clara did find herself a husband. Though even now, honestly, we still have no idea what he actually does for a living. This time the laughter truly burst open. I heard it hit the ceiling, echo down through the crystal glasses, and slide over my shoulders like cold water. My father took the microphone back, still laughing. Evelyn, you should be gentler, he said, though there was no correction in his voice. Clara has her own talents. Not everyone is born to lead. Some people are born to support. The word support fell like a sentence. I no longer felt embarrassed. I felt hollow. As if after 32 years, every effort I had made had finally been stripped bare in front of strangers. I turned to Ethan. The chair beside me was already empty. He was standing his back straight, his face calm, and for the first time that night, the smile on my father's face began to disappear. Ethan did not walk quickly. That was exactly what made the room gradually fall silent. He moved past the tables, covered in white cloth, past the eyes that were both curious and irritated, past the people who had been laughing at us only seconds earlier. Every step he took was frighteningly calm, as if he was not walking onto the stage to react, but to end something that had gone on for far too long. I wanted to stand up and pull him back. I wanted to say that I was used to it, that we could just go home. But when that thought appeared in my mind, it sounded so pitiful that it hurt. I had become so used to being humiliated that I wanted to protect the people who hurt me from the consequences of their own actions. My father watched Ethan approach. His smile froze on his lips, but his voice remained polite. Do you need something? Ethan stepped onto the stage. He did not snatch the microphone. He simply stood there and looked at my father. I need 1 minute. My mother immediately moved forward. Ethan, this is not the time. I think this is exactly the time, he said. The entire ballroom went completely silent. There was no sound of silverware, no clink of glasses, only the hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of my heart. My father lowered his voice. If there is something you are unhappy about, we can discuss it privately later. No, Ethan said. Just one word, but it made my father go still. I had never heard anyone say no to Victor Whitmore in front of a crowd without rushing to explain themselves. Ethan turned toward the room. I am Ethan Cole, Clara's husband. Perhaps many of you here only know me through what was just said as the man. The Whitmore family does not know what he does for a living. A few people lowered their eyes. My mother went pale. Ethan looked at me. There was no victory in his gaze. Only a very deep sadness. For 4 years I have sat at this family's dinner table. I have heard them call Clara's work small. I have heard them turn her devotion into something pitiful. I have heard Lauren say that Clara married down. And I stayed silent, not because I agreed, but because Clara needed me to stay silent. Lauren shot up from the front table. "This is ridiculous," Lauren said loudly. "This is my father's retirement party. You can't turn it into some emotional performance because of a few jokes." Ethan turned to her. "A few jokes do not make a woman learn how to hold her breath every time she goes back to her parents' house." Lauren gave a cold laugh. "You're just an outsider." "Yes," Ethan said. "And because I am an outsider, I can see more clearly what all of you have done to her." Lauren's face tightened. She grabbed the spare microphone. "You want everyone to feel sorry for Clara. The truth is, my sister chose an ordinary life. She chose to become a teacher. She chose to marry a man with no position in this society." A wave of murmurs moved through the room. I stood up without realizing it. Ethan remained calm. "You are right about one thing," he said. "Clara chose, and she chose work with more meaning than all the self-praise in this room." Lauren laughed. "Meaning doesn't pay the bills, Ethan." My father stepped forward. "That is enough. You have said what you needed to say." Ethan looked at him. Then he slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. I recognized the white envelope from the night before. "Not yet," he said. "Actually, I haven't even started." Rebecca Hayes suddenly stood up at the next table. Her face had gone white, her eyes fixed on Ethan. "Victor," she said, "do you truly not know who your son-in-law is?" The entire ballroom turned toward my father. For the first time in my life, I saw him without an answer. Ethan opened the envelope. And when he took out the first document, I knew there was no way back from that night. Ethan placed the document on the podium, then looked down at the room holding its breath. On the stage, my father stood less than 3 feet away from him, but for the first time I saw him as someone who had been pushed out of the spotlight. To answer the question, the Whitmore family never truly wanted to ask Ethan, said, "I do work in education. But I am not a tutor, and I do not sell a few small pieces of software to schools. I built a technology platform that helps children learn better." Lauren crossed her arms. "That sounds nice. So what?" Rebecca Hayes could not take it anymore. She stepped away from her table, her voice trembling. "Lauren, do you really not know EduSpark?" "His company is EduSpark." The name spread through the ballroom like an electric current. I saw the change on every face. First confusion, then recognition, then horror. Someone at table 3 took out his phone and searched. The woman beside him leaned down to look, then covered her mouth. "EduSpark," someone whispered. "That EdTech company." Rebecca turned to my father. "Victor, this company was just valued at over $200 million. Ethan Cole was on the cover of Tech North this summer. I have been trying to get a meeting with him for 6 months." It was as if all the air had been pulled out of the room. My mother stood frozen, one hand gripping the edge of the podium. My father looked at Ethan, then at Rebecca, then back at the document in Ethan's hand. "That's impossible," Lauren said, her voice already losing confidence. "If you're that Ethan Cole, why didn't Clara say anything?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Because none of you ever asked. You only assumed." My father stepped forward, trying to pull his control back into place. "Ethan, if that is true, we could have had many opportunities to work together." "The opportunity was in your house for 4 years," Ethan said. "Sitting at your dinner table. Washing dishes after dinners where you praised Lauren. Quietly taking Clara home every time her family hurt her. You did not miss a business opportunity, Victor. You missed the opportunity to be a decent father." Tears rose in my eyes. Not because Ethan was wealthy, not because the room was finally looking at him with respect. I cried because for the first time, someone had said out loud what I had been swallowing for years. Ethan opened the document. This is a $5 million sponsorship agreement for STEM programs in underfunded elementary schools across Massachusetts. The first school receiving support is Lincoln Elementary, where Clara teaches. The murmuring rose again. But this time it was not laughter. It was the sound of people realizing they had laughed at the wrong person, and worse, that they had laughed at a woman who deserved respect. If you witnessed someone who had been looked down on for years, finally having her dignity returned, would you stand with Clara, or would you say Ethan went too far? Comment, Clara, or Ethan, so I know what you think. Ethan lowered the microphone. Clara is the reason I built EduSpark. I saw her buying pencils with her own money. I saw her staying at school until evening because one child was afraid to read in front of the class. I saw her believing in students whom adults had grown tired of believing in. If that is failure, then this room needs to redefine success. My father could not say anything. My mother was crying, though. I did not know whether it came from regret or shame. Lauren lowered her face for the first time, unable to find a sentence sharp enough to wound someone else. Ethan stepped down from the stage. The crowd automatically parted for him. He did not look at them. He only looked at me. When he reached me, he held out his hand. I'm sorry I waited this long, he said quietly. I kept hoping they would see you on their own. I placed my hand in his, and in that moment, I understood that the biggest twist was not that Ethan was richer than they had imagined. The biggest twist was that I no longer wanted them to decide my worth. I do not remember how I walked onto that stage. Maybe Ethan was still holding my hand. Maybe the whole room was still watching us in a silence as heavy as broken glass. I only remember one thing. For the first time in my life, I did not want to hide behind anyone. My mother called my name first. Clara, sweetheart, I didn't know, she said. If you had told us about Ethan, everything would have been different. That sentence made me stop. Not because it was true, but because it exposed everything. In my mother's eyes, the problem was not that she had humiliated her daughter in front of 150 people. The problem was that she had humiliated the wrong person, someone who had value by her standards. I turned back to look at her. Different, how, Mom? Her mouth opened, but she gave no answer. What if Ethan did not own EduSpark, I asked. What if he really was just an ordinary man trying to live decently? Would your joke have been acceptable then? My mother burst into tears. My father stepped forward, his face dark red. Clara, enough. This should be discussed privately as a family. I looked at him for a long time. Even now, he was still trying to use the word family to pull me back into silence. No, I said. I have been discussing it privately for 32 years. The room went still. I took the microphone. My hand was trembling, but my voice did not tremble as much as I thought it would. My name is Clara Whitmore, I said. The daughter who disappointed her parents because she chose to become a teacher. The sister who was compared to Lauren at every dinner. The wife who allowed her husband to be looked down on for 4 years because I was afraid that if I fought back, my family would fall apart. I looked down at table 14, the table near the kitchen doors, where the napkins were still wrinkled. But tonight I realized that a family does not fall apart because one person tells the truth. A family falls apart when respect is only given to people with money, power, and usefulness to your reputation. Rebecca Hayes was still standing near the stage, her eyes fixed on my father. I knew Boston would talk about that night tomorrow, but for the first time I was not afraid. My parents just discovered that my husband is successful by their exact definition, I continued. But that does not make me more valuable. I had value before Ethan ever walked onto this stage. I had value when I stood in my classroom, when I wiped away the tears of a child being laughed at by classmates. Ethan stood below the stage, looking at me as if he knew I had to say the rest by myself. I do not need to be loved because my husband is wealthy. I do not need to be invited to the front table because my father realized he missed a business connection. I only need the basic respect that a daughter, a wife, and a teacher deserves. Lauren suddenly spoke quieter than usual. You're making it sound like I'm a terrible person. I looked at my sister. No, Lauren. You are just so used to having the whole family applaud you that you mistook other people's silence for having nothing to say. Then I turned back to my parents. From today on, I will no longer ask permission to be myself. If you want a place in my life, the first condition is respect. No mocking Ethan. No treating my work as a joke. No loving me in a way that requires me to become smaller just to fit inside your pride. I placed the microphone down. There was no applause right away. Only silence. But it was no longer the silence of shame. It was the silence after an old door had finally been closed. Ethan reached his hand toward me. I stepped down and took it. And this time when we walked through the ballroom, I did not lower my head. We left the Hartwell Hotel before the party ended. No one stopped us. No one knew what to say. The same people who had been laughing at me only minutes earlier now stood in small groups looking at my father with an expression he had never had to endure in his life. It was not hatred. It was worse. It was doubt. In the car, I turned off my phone. The screen lit up once before going dark. My mother called. My father called. Lauren sent a message. But for the first time, I did not feel that I had to answer immediately. I sat beside Ethan, watching the city drift past the window, and felt a strange emptiness inside my chest. Are you okay? Ethan asked. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking. I don't know, I said. I thought that once I said everything, I would feel strong. But right now, I only feel tired. Ethan took my hand. Being tired doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes it is what you feel after you finally stop holding yourself together. The next morning, Rebecca Hayes called Ethan. Her voice through the speaker was polite but cold. Ethan, I want to apologize for last night. Hayes Capital will be pausing all discussions with Whitmore Development. After what I witnessed, I no longer trust Victor's judgment. After the call, Ethan looked at me. He did not look pleased. Neither did I. But I did not feel guilty. That was the difference. Within a week, 2 of my father's major projects were put on hold. An investor from New York pulled out of the Harborfront complex. A longtime partner requested a full review of their contract. Rumors spread quickly through Boston's business circles. Victor Whitmore had humiliated his daughter and son-in-law in front of a tech CEO worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But what destroyed his reputation was not the fact that Ethan was wealthy. It was the fact that the whole room had seen how he treated his own family with contempt. Lauren sent me a long message. She said I was selfish. She said I had deliberately hidden Ethan's identity to embarrass the family. She said I had ruined the most important night of our father's life. I read halfway through and put the phone down. In the past, those words would have kept me awake all night. Now they only made me sad. My mother left 14 voice messages. In the first, she cried. In the second, she said she had always loved me. By the 5th, she was asking whether Ethan could speak with my father about releasing a joint statement. I deleted that one before it finished playing. 3 days later, Uncle George called. He was my father's older brother, the one who had left the family company to become a high school principal. My father had always called him a man who wasted his talent. Maybe that was why Uncle George understood me better than anyone. Clara, he said, I am proud of you. That single sentence made me burst into tears. I realized I had been waiting far too long to hear it from someone in my family. He told me my father had been wrong for years. Ethan had stood up for me, but what mattered more was that I had finally stood up for myself. That evening, Ethan sat beside me on the sofa. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I thought about my father, my mother Lauren, and the crystal-filled room that had laughed at me. "No," I said. "I only regret that it took me so many years to understand that silence does not keep a family together. It only keeps the wound in place." 3 weeks after the night at the Hartwell Hotel, I agreed to meet my parents at a small coffee shop in Back Bay. I chose a public place not to embarrass them, but to keep myself from being pulled back into my old role. Ethan offered to come with me. I said no. "There are doors. Other people can help you open, but walking through them still has to be your own decision." My parents were already seated when I arrived. My father was wearing a gray sweater instead of an expensive suit. My mother was not wearing diamonds. Both of them looked smaller because for the first time I could look at them without feeling myself shrink. "Thank you for coming," my father said. I sat down. "I came to listen. Not to forget." My mother wiped the corner of her eye. "I'm sorry, Clara. I didn't know it hurt you that much." I looked at her. "You knew." It was just easier to ignore when I suffered in silence. My father took a long breath. "I wanted more for you." "No," I said gently. "You wanted me to become something that made it easier for you to be proud." I no longer explained things for them. I no longer softened the air so they could feel more comfortable. I simply sat there like someone who had finally earned the right to take up enough space. "Can you let us start over?" my mother asked. "Maybe," I said. "But starting over does not mean erasing everything. From now on, if you want to be in my life, respect comes first. No mocking my work as a teacher. No calling Ethan lucky because he has money. No loving me only when I make you look more impressive." My father nodded slowly. I did not know whether he truly understood, but this time I only needed to know that I had made my boundaries clear. If you have ever had to learn how to love your family from a safe distance, comment, peace. Some relationships only have a chance when we stop letting them hurt us. That night I went home. Ethan was standing on the balcony, 2 cups of hot tea on the small table. "Are you okay?" he asked. I rested my head on his shoulder. "I think I am." I thought about my classroom, about the children who would walk in tomorrow morning with eyes that needed to be believed. I thought about the STEM program, about new books, new chances, new doors, opening. Then I thought about 10-year-old Clara, the little girl who once said she wanted to become a teacher and was laughed at by her whole family. I wanted to go back and hold her. I wanted to tell her that one day she would not need anyone's permission to have value. Because people who truly love us do not make us prove we are worthy. They see us even when the world has not applauded yet. And for the first time in 32 years, I believed that with my whole heart,